What if the richest woman in the city could only recognize true wealth after losing every sign of it? A cold autumn rain drifted across the streets of Portland, turning the sidewalks into shimmering ribbons beneath rows of glowing streetlights. Office towers disappeared behind low clouds, while hurried strangers pulled their coats tighter and rushed toward warm cars waiting at the curb. Only one woman seemed determined to keep walking without asking anyone for help. Audrey Harrison adjusted the plain gray jacket she had deliberately chosen that morning, its faded fabric a dramatic contrast to the elegant designer clothing that usually filled her private closet. Her chestnut brown hair was tied into a simple ponytail, and the expensive jewelry that often attracted attention had been replaced by nothing more than a modest wristwatch. For the third weekend in a row, the billionaire owner of Harrison Capital had stepped into the city disguised as an ordinary woman. Newspapers admired her business genius. Television hosts praised her investments. Charities celebrated her generosity. Yet none of those achievements answered the question that had quietly followed her for years. If people did not know she was wealthy, would anyone still choose kindness? A few blocks away, Daniel Brooks carefully locked the front door of his small woodworking shop after finishing a custom dining table for a young family preparing to welcome their first child. His hands carried the familiar scent of cedar and oak, while tiny traces of sawdust remained on his blue flannel shirt despite his efforts to brush it away. Honest craftsmanship had never made him wealthy, but every piece he built reminded him that lasting things required patience. He glanced at the time and smiled to himself. If traffic stayed light, he would arrive home before his 10-year-old daughter finished her homework. Friday evenings belonged to the two of them. They always cooked dinner together, laughed over small stories from school, and ended the night with homemade hot chocolate no matter what season filled the calendar. As Daniel loaded a toolbox into his aging pickup truck, he noticed an older compact sedan resting quietly beneath a flickering street lamp several yards away. Its hood was raised. One tire sat partly against the curb. Beside the vehicle stood Audrey, studying the silent engine with calm determination instead of frustration. Several passing drivers slowed for only a moment before continuing through the rain. A few pedestrians glanced toward her, then hurried away without speaking. Daniel watched for another few seconds before walking across the wet pavement, carrying his toolbox. "Good evening," he said with an easy smile. "Looks like your car is having a difficult day." Audrey looked up, almost surprised that someone had stopped. "I think it decided today was the perfect time to quit." Daniel laughed softly. Machines usually have terrible timing. He knelt beside the open hood, carefully examining loose battery connections while rain tapped gently against the metal. Audrey observed him in silence. He never asked who she was. He never looked for expensive clothing or signs of status. He simply focused on solving the problem in front of him. After several careful minutes, Daniel tightened one worn cable and asked her to try the ignition. The engine coughed once before coming smoothly back to life. Audrey's eyes brightened with genuine relief. She reached into her bag. "Please let me pay you." Daniel shook his head before she could remove her wallet. "You only owe me for one thing." She paused. "What is that?" He smiled toward the warm lights glowing inside a nearby neighborhood diner. "Promise me you will not drive home hungry on a rainy night like this. There is a little place across the street that serves the best chicken soup in Portland. My daughter and I were already heading there. If you do not mind simple company, you are welcome to join us." Audrey looked at him with quiet disbelief. During years of extraordinary success, countless people had approached her hoping to gain something. Standing in the rain before her was the first stranger in a very long time who had offered kindness without asking a single question in return. The warm lights of the neighborhood diner glowed through rain-covered windows as Daniel held the door open for Audrey with the same quiet courtesy he would have shown anyone else. The small restaurant smelled of fresh bread, homemade chicken soup, and cinnamon pie cooling behind the counter. Laughter drifted from a nearby family booth, while gentle country music played softly through overhead speakers. Audrey stepped inside, surprised by how comfortable such an ordinary place could feel. Daniel smiled toward a corner booth where his 10-year-old daughter, Emma, sat coloring in a sketchbook while patiently waiting for her father. The little girl looked up with bright blue eyes and immediately waved. "Hi, Daddy." Daniel introduced them with complete simplicity. "Emma, this is Audrey. Her car decided it needed a break tonight." Emma giggled. Cars do that sometimes. Audrey laughed quietly before taking the empty seat across from them. Apparently mine wanted an evening off. A cheerful waitress arrived carrying 3 glasses of ice water before Daniel ordered 2 bowls of chicken soup, grilled cheese sandwiches for himself and Emma, and politely asked Audrey if she would like anything different. She looked at the menu for only a moment before smiling. I think I will have exactly what everyone else is having. Daniel nodded. Good choice. They make the best soup in the neighborhood. As the waitress walked away, Emma continued coloring while occasionally glancing toward Audrey with innocent curiosity. Do you have children? She asked gently. Audrey paused for a brief moment before answering honestly. No, Emma smiled kindly. Maybe someday. Daniel quietly changed the subject before Audrey could feel uncomfortable. Emma has been practicing kindness all week at school. The little girl proudly nodded. Our teacher says kindness is the only thing that grows after you give it away. Audrey looked at the child with genuine admiration. Your teacher sounds very wise. Emma pointed toward her father. Daddy says the same thing. Daniel laughed softly. I think I borrowed it from someone wiser than me. Their meals arrived steaming hot, filling the booth with comforting aromas. Audrey noticed Daniel thanking the waitress by name before asking how her elderly father had been recovering after surgery. She watched the waitress smile with obvious appreciation. A few minutes later, an older customer accidentally dropped his walking cane while leaving another table. Before anyone else reacted, Daniel quietly stood, picked it up, and handed it back with a warm smile. He returned to his seat without expecting gratitude or recognition. Audrey observed every small moment carefully. Throughout her years leading a billion-dollar investment company, she had met countless people who performed generous acts whenever influential eyes were watching. Daniel behaved exactly the same whether anyone noticed or not. After dinner, Audrey once again reached for her wallet. Please allow me to pay. Daniel gently raised his hand. You already offered once. And I still mean it. He smiled kindly. Then perhaps one day you can help someone else who needs it. That will be more than enough. Audrey slowly returned her wallet to her bag, feeling something unexpected settle quietly inside her heart. Nobody had refused her money without hesitation before. Nobody had spoken about kindness as though it belonged to everyone equally. Outside, the rain had almost stopped, leaving tiny reflections dancing across the sidewalks beneath the streetlights. As they stepped into the cool evening air, Audrey looked back toward Daniel and Emma laughing together beside the old pickup truck. She realized her experiment was no longer about discovering whether kindness still existed. It had quietly become a search to understand how one ordinary father had managed to build a life so rich in compassion without ever possessing extraordinary wealth. The next morning the rain had disappeared, leaving Portland wrapped in cool autumn sunshine that reflected softly across quiet neighborhood streets. Daniel unlocked the front door of his woodworking shop before 8 o'clock, breathing in the familiar scent of freshly cut walnut, pine, and cedar that always reminded him he was exactly where he belonged. Emma sat at a small desk in the corner finishing her math homework before school, occasionally looking up to wave at customers who passed the front window. Daddy, she asked while erasing a pencil mark, do you think the lady from last night made it home safely? Daniel smiled as he adjusted a wooden cabinet door on his workbench. I hope she did. Emma nodded thoughtfully. She looked lonely. Daniel paused for only a moment before quietly replying. Sometimes people carry things we cannot see. Across the city, Audrey sat inside a sleek executive conference room surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Portland. The polished oak table stretched nearly 20 feet, and financial reports filled with impressive numbers covered every seat. Senior executives discussed acquisitions, investment strategies, and market forecasts with practiced confidence, yet Audrey heard almost none of it. Her thoughts kept returning to a modest diner, a little girl who believed kindness grew stronger every time it was shared, and a single father who had refused money without the slightest hesitation. One executive noticed her distant expression. Ms. Harrison, are you comfortable approving the proposal? Audrey looked back toward the documents before calmly signing them. Yes. But inside she was asking herself an entirely different question. Had she spent years measuring success while overlooking character? That afternoon, she quietly changed her schedule without informing anyone except her personal assistant. Instead of returning to the executive offices after lunch, She drove the same older sedan she had used during her disguise back toward Daniel's neighborhood. She parked several buildings away before walking into his woodworking shop carrying a worn wooden picture frame she had purchased from a second-hand store that morning. The tiny brass corner had come loose, though she could easily have repaired it herself. Daniel looked up from sanding a handcrafted bookshelf and smiled with immediate recognition. "Good afternoon. It is nice to see you again." Audrey returned the smile. "I was hoping you might be able to help me with this." Daniel gently examined the frame before nodding. "Nothing serious. Give me about 15 minutes." Audrey offered to wait. While Daniel worked carefully at his bench, an elderly woman entered carrying a rocking chair with one broken armrest. She apologized repeatedly, explaining she could not afford an expensive repair because she lived on a limited retirement income. Daniel listened patiently before saying, "Let me see what I can do." After inspecting the chair, he smiled kindly. "The wood is still strong. It only needs a little time." The woman asked how much she owed. Daniel quietly shook his head. "Just bring me one of your stories the next time you stop by." The woman laughed through grateful eyes. "I have plenty of those." Audrey watched the exchange without speaking. Daniel had no idea anyone was observing him. There were no cameras, no reporters, and no wealthy client to impress. His kindness appeared as natural as breathing. Before leaving, Audrey accepted her repaired picture frame and once again reached into her bag. Daniel smiled before she could remove anything. "You already know my answer." Audrey laughed softly. "I was only looking for my car keys." Daniel looked slightly embarrassed before laughing with her. "Then I suppose I have become suspicious of gratitude." Audrey looked at him with quiet admiration. "No," she said gently. "You have simply become accustomed to giving more than you receive." As she drove away, she realized her original experiment had quietly changed direction. She was no longer testing Daniel. Without realizing it, Daniel was slowly teaching her everything money had never been able to buy. Over the following week, Audrey found herself inventing small reasons to return to Daniel's woodworking shop, each visit carefully planned to appear accidental, while quietly revealing another piece of the man she could not stop thinking about. One afternoon, she brought an old wooden jewelry box with a loose hinge. Another morning, she asked whether he knew anyone who could restore a weathered porch bench she claimed had belonged to her grandmother. Daniel welcomed her with the same easy smile every single time. He never appeared surprised to see her. He never treated her differently than anyone else who walked through the front door. Whether the customer wore expensive clothes or work boots covered in paint, his voice remained equally warm, equally patient, equally respectful. Audrey began noticing details she had overlooked during their first meeting. Every completed project carried a handwritten thank you note tucked inside before customers collected it. Every child who entered the shop was invited to keep a small carved wooden animal Daniel had made from leftover scraps. Every elderly visitor left smiling because Daniel somehow found time to listen to stories that many people had stopped hearing years ago. One crisp Saturday morning, Audrey arrived just as a young couple stood nervously examining a handcrafted dining table displayed near the entrance. They quietly admitted they loved it, but could not afford the full price because they were expecting their first baby. Daniel listened without interrupting before calculating something on a small notepad. He smiled gently and lowered the price enough to fit their budget. The husband protested that it was too generous. Daniel simply replied, "A table becomes valuable because of the family that gathers around it, not because of the number written on a receipt." The couple thanked him repeatedly before leaving with grateful smiles. Audrey watched from across the room, saying nothing. She knew exactly how much profit he had quietly given away. Yet Daniel returned to sanding another cabinet as though nothing unusual had happened. Later that afternoon, Audrey decided to try one final test. While Daniel finished polishing a rocking chair in the workshop, she quietly placed an envelope containing $5,000 beneath the repaired picture frame she had purchased days earlier. She intended to leave before he discovered it. As she reached the door, Daniel called her name. She turned around, pretending not to understand. He walked toward her holding the unopened envelope. "I believe you accidentally left this behind." Audrey looked at him carefully. "Perhaps I meant to." Daniel smiled kindly before placing the envelope back into her hands. "If this is payment for repairing the frame, then I charged you far too much." Audrey searched his face for even the smallest hint of hesitation, but found none. What if I simply wanted to thank you? Daniel folded his arms comfortably and looked toward the sunlight streaming through the workshop windows. Then thank me by showing the same kindness to someone who cannot repay you. That investment will last much longer than anything inside that envelope. His words settled quietly between them. Audrey slowly slipped the envelope back into her bag without another argument. For the first time in many years, she realized she had spent a lifetime believing generosity flowed from wealth. Standing inside a simple woodworking shop surrounded by the scent of cedar and freshly polished oak, she finally understood the opposite could also be true. Wealth could build beautiful buildings, but only character could build trust. As she drove away beneath rows of golden autumn trees, Audrey no longer questioned whether Daniel possessed genuine kindness. The only mystery remaining was whether she would ever find the courage to reveal who she truly was, knowing that honesty might change everything they had quietly begun to share. The quiet rhythm that had settled into Audrey's secret visits could not remain hidden forever. Inside the glass headquarters of Harrison Capital, executives began noticing unusual gaps in the billionaire's carefully organized schedule. Her assistant politely rearranged meetings without explanation, while members of the executive board quietly exchanged curious looks whenever Audrey insisted on leaving the office without security or a driver. During one Monday afternoon meeting, the chairman gently closed a financial report before looking toward her. Audrey, we all respect your privacy, but investors have begun asking questions. You have canceled several social events and declined interviews. Is everything all right? Audrey answered with calm confidence. Everything is better than it has been in a long time. The room fell silent. No one understood what she meant. After the meeting ended, her longtime legal advisor remained behind. You have spent weeks living under another name, he said carefully. If someone discovers your identity before you choose to reveal it, the story could become much larger than you expect. Audrey walked toward the wide windows overlooking Portland and watched golden leaves drifting between tall office buildings. Perhaps, she replied softly, but for the first time in years, someone has spoken to me without seeing my last name. Her advisor understood there would be no changing her mind. Meanwhile, life inside Daniel's woodworking shop continued exactly as it always had. Orders arrived. Furniture was repaired. Emma finished school each afternoon before quietly doing homework at a small desk near the workshop window. Yet even in their peaceful neighborhood, people had begun noticing the familiar woman who visited the shop every few days. A nearby florist smiled one afternoon and jokingly asked Daniel whether he had found someone special. Daniel laughed politely and answered, "She is simply a kind customer." The florist nodded with a knowing smile, though the conversation quietly spread through nearby businesses. Emma noticed it too. While helping her father sweep sawdust from the floor one evening, she looked up with innocent curiosity. "Daddy, do you like Audrey?" Daniel paused before leaning on the broom handle. "I think she is a very thoughtful person." Emma smiled. "That was not exactly my question." Daniel laughed quietly. "You are becoming much too clever." She giggled before returning to her work. "I think she smiles differently when she talks to you." Daniel did not answer immediately because somewhere deep inside he had started noticing the same thing. A few days later, Audrey stopped by with nothing that needed repairing. Instead, she carried a small paper bag from a neighborhood bakery. "I heard this place makes wonderful cinnamon rolls," she said with a gentle smile. "I thought 3 people might enjoy them more than one." Emma clapped happily before running to make fresh coffee for her father and hot chocolate for herself. They spent nearly an hour talking about favorite books, childhood memories, community festivals, and simple dreams that had nothing to do with money or success. Audrey found herself laughing more freely than she had in years. Daniel listened with genuine interest instead of admiration. Emma treated Audrey as though she had always belonged at their little table. As evening sunlight filled the workshop with warm golden light, Audrey quietly realized the experiment she had started weeks earlier had already reached its conclusion. Daniel had passed every invisible test without ever knowing one existed. The only truth still hidden between them was the one she feared most. She had never lied about her kindness, her loneliness, or her growing affection for Daniel, but she had hidden the single fact that could change everything. Standing beside the doorway as she prepared to leave, Audrey looked back at the father and daughter laughing together over warm cinnamon rolls and silently wondered whether honesty would bring her closer to the life she had begun to love, or gently take it away forever. The truth arrived on a clear Thursday afternoon when Audrey realized there was no honorable way to continue hiding behind another name. She had built one of the largest investment companies in the country by believing that honesty created lasting partnerships. Yet every meaningful conversation she now treasured with Daniel had begun beneath a disguise. The contradiction weighed heavily on her heart. She stood inside her executive office overlooking downtown Portland, holding the simple wooden picture frame Daniel had repaired weeks earlier. It rested on her desk instead of the expensive awards and crystal trophies that once seemed important. Her assistant quietly entered the room. "The press conference is ready whenever you are." Audrey nodded slowly. "Please cancel it." The assistant looked surprised. "Cancel it." Audrey smiled gently. "There is someone I need to speak with before I speak to the world." Less than an hour later, she parked her luxury sedan several blocks away from Daniel's workshop and walked the remaining distance alone, carrying no security detail, no photographers, and no executives. The familiar scent of freshly cut cedar greeted her as she stepped inside. Daniel looked up from polishing a handcrafted rocking chair and smiled exactly as he always had. "Good afternoon, Audrey." She returned the smile, though this time it carried visible nervousness. Emma noticed immediately. "Is everything okay?" Audrey knelt beside the little girl and answered honestly. "I hope it will be." Daniel sensed the unusual seriousness in her voice. After Emma stepped into the small office to finish reading a library book, Audrey slowly turned back toward him. For several quiet moments, she simply looked at the workshop around her. Every shelf, every tool, every unfinished project reminded her of the peaceful life she feared she might lose. Finally, she took a slow breath. "There is something I should have told you the first night we met." Daniel waited without interrupting. "My name really is Audrey Harrison." He smiled politely. "I know." She blinked in confusion before continuing. "I am the owner of Harrison Capital." The smile on Daniel's face faded into quiet surprise, but not disbelief. He looked at her carefully, searching for any sign that she might be joking. She quietly removed a business card from her purse and placed it on the workbench beside him. The familiar company logo instantly answered every question. Silence settled across the room. Outside, a gentle breeze carried golden autumn leaves past the front windows. Inside, only the soft ticking of an old wall clock could be heard. Daniel finally spoke. "So the woman whose car I repaired," Audrey nodded, "was never stranded by accident." She lowered her eyes. "I had been quietly visiting different neighborhoods, hoping to discover whether kindness still existed when nobody recognized me." Daniel leaned lightly against the workbench without anger or accusation. He simply absorbed the truth. "Then I was part of your experiment." Audrey's voice grew softer. "At first, yes." She looked directly into his eyes. "But somewhere along the way the experiment ended, and the friendship became real. Everything I have shared with you since then has been honest except my identity." Daniel walked toward the front window, watching families stroll along the sidewalk outside. After a long, thoughtful silence, he quietly asked, "Did you ever believe I would treat you differently if I knew who you really were?" Audrey answered with complete honesty. "I was afraid you might." Daniel turned back with the same calm expression she had admired from the very beginning. "Then you never truly understood why I stopped to help you that rainy night." Audrey felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from rejection, but from the painful realization that the man standing before her had never needed her fortune to see her value. He had only ever needed the truth. Daniel remained quietly standing beside the workshop window while afternoon sunlight stretched across the wooden floor, painting long golden lines between unfinished tables and carefully arranged tools. Audrey waited without speaking because she understood that trust could not be hurried. Emma slowly stepped out from the small office, sensing the unusual silence between the two adults. She looked from her father to Audrey with gentle concern. "Did something happen?" Daniel smiled softly, determined not to place adult burdens upon a child's heart. "We are simply having an honest conversation." Emma nodded before returning to her book, satisfied by the calmness in his voice. Audrey finally broke the silence. "I never wanted to make you feel like you were being judged." Daniel looked at the worn workbench where countless pieces of furniture had been restored through patience instead of force. "I do not feel judged," he answered quietly. I feel sad that you believed kindness needed to be tested before it could be trusted. Audrey lowered her eyes. His words carried no anger, yet they reached deeper than criticism ever could. She thought about years spent surrounded by wealth, contracts, interviews, and carefully practiced smiles. Too many people had approached her hoping to gain access to her fortune, her influence, or her company. Somewhere along the way, she had forgotten that genuine goodness often appeared without any audience at all. I stopped believing people saw me, she admitted. Most only saw my last name. Daniel nodded with understanding. That must have been lonely. Audrey looked up in surprise. She had expected disappointment, perhaps even resentment. Instead, she found compassion. Daniel continued speaking with the same steady kindness that had first drawn her toward him. Loneliness can convince good people to make fearful decisions. She felt tears gathering once again. Can you forgive me? Daniel did not answer immediately. He walked toward a nearly finished dining table resting in the center of the workshop and gently ran his hand across its smooth wooden surface. Wood remembers every cut, he said quietly. But if you care for it properly, those marks become part of something beautiful instead of something broken. Audrey listened carefully. People are much the same. He turned toward her with a peaceful smile. I forgive you. Relief washed across Audrey's face so completely that she almost laughed through her tears. Emma looked up from her book, noticing both adults smiling again. She hurried over carrying 3 paper cups of fresh lemonade she had quietly prepared while waiting. I thought everyone could use a break. Daniel accepted his cup with a grateful smile. Audrey did the same, touched by another simple act of kindness that expected nothing in return. After a few peaceful moments, Audrey reached into her purse once more, but instead of money, she removed a folded invitation. Tomorrow evening, Harrison Capital is hosting its annual Community Appreciation Dinner, she explained. This year I would like you and Emma to attend as my personal guests. Daniel looked at the elegant invitation before gently handing it back. I appreciate the offer. Audrey noticed the hesitation in his eyes. But, he smiled kindly, I would rather not become a symbol for anyone's generosity. Audrey nodded slowly, understanding exactly what he meant. Then come only as my friends. Daniel looked toward Emma, who smiled hopefully, then back at Audrey. Friends do not need special invitations, he replied warmly. If we come, we will come because we want to spend time together, not because of your title. Audrey smiled brighter than she had in many years. For the first time since revealing her true identity, the distance between billionaire and carpenter quietly disappeared. Standing together inside the little woodworking shop filled with the scent of cedar and sunlight, they both realized that respect had survived the truth. Forgiveness had replaced fear, and the strongest foundation any relationship could ever have was no longer hidden beneath disguise, but built openly upon honesty. The following evening, the grand ballroom of Harrison Capital shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors reflecting warm golden light, while hundreds of community leaders, teachers, firefighters, nurses, small business owners, and volunteers gathered to celebrate the people who quietly strengthened Portland every day. Unlike previous years, the event felt different before it had even begun. Audrey had instructed her staff to remove the reserved seating for influential guests. Every table looked exactly the same. Every place setting carried the same handwritten message. Thank you for making our community stronger. Daniel arrived wearing a neatly pressed navy blazer beside Emma, whose bright smile carried far more excitement than nervousness. Audrey greeted them personally at the entrance instead of standing beneath the company logo greeting investors. I am so glad you came, she said warmly. Emma looked around the beautifully decorated ballroom with wide eyes. It looks like a fairy tale. Audrey laughed softly. Tonight I hope it feels like home instead. As dinner began, several executives quietly noticed Audrey spending far more time speaking with local teachers, volunteers, and neighborhood business owners than wealthy donors. They exchanged puzzled glances but remained respectful. Daniel observed everything without drawing attention to himself. He thanked every server who refilled a glass, complimented the musicians after each performance, and listened attentively whenever someone shared a personal story. Audrey smiled as she watched him. Even surrounded by elegance and luxury, nothing about him had changed. When the evening program reached its final presentation, Audrey stepped onto the stage before the audience. The room slowly became silent. Behind her, A large screen displayed photographs of schools, shelters, family businesses, and community projects supported by the Harrison Foundation. Audrey looked across the audience before speaking with calm sincerity. For many years, I believed generosity began with wealth. I thought successful people changed communities through large donations and impressive buildings. Recently, someone quietly reminded me that true generosity begins much earlier than that. It begins when one person chooses kindness without expecting recognition. Many guests nodded thoughtfully while listening. Audrey continued, "Because of that lesson, the Harrison Foundation will begin a new initiative supporting single parents, family-owned workshops, and neighborhood craftsmen throughout Oregon. We will invest in people whose character has already been enriching this community long before anyone noticed." Applause filled the ballroom, but Audrey's eyes searched only for Daniel. He looked genuinely surprised, almost uncomfortable with the attention, even though she had never spoken his name. Emma reached for her father's hand beneath the table and whispered proudly, "I think she is talking about people like you." Daniel smiled gently. "She is talking about many good people." After the presentation ended, guests surrounded Audrey with congratulations, yet she quietly excused herself and walked toward Daniel's table. "Would you like to see something?" she asked. Daniel nodded. She led him and Emma outside onto a peaceful terrace overlooking the city skyline, where cool evening air carried the scent of autumn leaves. Below them, Portland glowed beneath thousands of lights stretching toward the distant hills. Audrey rested her hands on the stone railing. "For years I stood here after every event believing I had everything anyone could ever want." She turned toward Daniel with quiet honesty. "Now I realize I was missing the one thing money never gave me. People who cared whether I smiled when the evening ended." Daniel looked across the quiet city before answering. "Sometimes the greatest fortunes are waiting in places the world never thinks to measure." Audrey smiled, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and hope. Standing together beneath the peaceful Oregon night, while laughter drifted softly from the ballroom behind them, neither billionaire nor carpenter seemed defined by titles anymore. They were simply two people who had discovered that the richest investment either of them would ever make was choosing to trust a kind heart. 1 year later, the first gentle rain of autumn returned to Portland, quietly washing the streets with the same peaceful rhythm that had brought two strangers together on an ordinary evening neither of them would ever forget. Harrison Capital continued to grow, but people inside the company noticed something far more remarkable than rising profits. Audrey no longer measured success only through financial reports or expansion plans. Every executive meeting now began with one simple question: whose life became better because of our work this week? The answer mattered more to her than any quarterly number. The Harrison Foundation had expanded its programs for single parents, neighborhood craftsmen, family businesses, and community apprenticeships throughout Oregon. Hundreds of families received opportunities they never imagined possible, yet Audrey always insisted that every announcement celebrate the people being helped instead of the organization providing assistance. Across town, Daniel's woodworking shop remained almost exactly the same. The walls still carried the comforting scent of cedar. Sunlight still poured through the front windows each morning. Emma had grown taller, but she still completed homework at the little desk beside the workshop before helping her father organize tools after school. The only noticeable difference was a framed photograph resting near the entrance. It showed Daniel, Emma, and Audrey planting young maple trees together during a neighborhood volunteer day. Customers often smiled when they saw the picture because it reflected everything the little workshop had quietly become. One Friday evening, Audrey finished work earlier than usual before driving herself to Daniel's home, carrying nothing more than a homemade apple pie that Emma had helped teach her to bake. She laughed softly when Daniel opened the front door. "I followed the recipe exactly this time." Daniel smiled warmly as he welcomed her inside. "Then I already know it will be wonderful." Emma hurried into the kitchen carrying 3 mugs of hot chocolate. "I made extra marshmallows because everybody deserves a celebration." They shared dinner around the small wooden table Daniel had handcrafted years earlier. Conversation moved naturally from school projects to community events, from new woodworking ideas to plans for another neighborhood charity fair. Nobody mentioned billion-dollar investments. Nobody discussed public recognition. Those subjects no longer seemed important once laughter filled the room. After dinner, they stepped onto the back porch where light rain drifted softly across the garden. Tiny drops rested upon colorful autumn flowers, while warm light spilled through the kitchen windows behind them. Audrey looked toward Daniel with peaceful certainty. "Do you remember the first night we met?" Daniel nodded with a quiet smile. "You believed you were searching for kind people." Audrey gently shook her head. "Now I know I was actually searching for a place where I could finally stop pretending." Daniel looked toward Emma, watching the rain with childlike wonder before speaking softly. "Home has a way of finding people who stop looking for perfection and start choosing honesty." Audrey reached for his hand, not because of wealth, success, or admiration, but because trust had quietly become stronger than every difference that once stood between them. She finally understood that the greatest investment of her life had never appeared on a balance sheet. It began the moment a single father repaired an old car without asking who she was, invited a stranger to share warm soup with his daughter, and reminded a lonely billionaire that true richness was never measured by money. It was measured by compassion freely given, dignity quietly lived, and the simple joy of knowing someone would always be waiting when you came home. As gentle rain continued falling beneath the Oregon night, three grateful hearts stood together in peaceful silence, proving that kindness never asks for applause because its greatest reward is becoming the foundation of a family.